Now we will look at Obama's specific communications as an adult, as he writes in the 5 major communications I talked about. He also makes spontaneous comments, and at the National Prayer Breakfast he said, "I hope you won't question my faith or my citizenship." Read through his denial, question my faith and question my citizenship. So we have a clue there. We have a clue just if we take an overview of his speeches. At one of his speeches he talks about feeding, during the campaign, feeding his kids junk food, and he shouldn't have, but really alluding to feeding the American people junk food about who he really was. Junk meaning phony, false. He goes on in another speech to comment on being an unconventional president who lived above the office of the White House. Again, thinking that he was outside the boundaries of convention of the normal president. But it's the inauguration speech where he reveals most clearly, at the exact moment he's taken the oath, after he's taken the oath, that he's an illegal president, an illegal foreign-born president. And he opens with mindful of the sacrifices borne by our ancestors. If we just decode that, he's introduced the birth issue, he's introduced being the 44th American president, but he's introduced the birth issue in the very opening part of the speech. So he suggests that he has sacrificed the birth requirements of the ancestors in the Constitution. He has sacrificed our ancestors' requirements. He goes on and announces that he's taken the oath under stormy conditions. The oath is normally taken under peaceful conditions, but now stormy conditions. He's storming against the oath. He immediately follows this with the image of America is now in a crisis, at war against a far-reaching foreign network of violence and hatred. On one level, he's talking about, again, his displaced anger towards America. He's secretly foreign-born, and he's confessing to that. He follows that. And it's so typical with a confession, they'll bring in the moral compass issue. He follows this with 5 references to the Constitution. We, the people, must live by the Constitution. It has been that way. It must be that way. So he highlights the Constitution, and he will do this over and over. We find other images suggesting a foreign birth that we've reviewed in part. Numerous stories of people coming from afar, foreigners coming across the ocean to settle America. Again, America taking in a stranger. He then comes to 2 striking stories about his father. If we look at those stories, the first one, he talks about we must never give up the Constitution, we must never give up our charter. He immediately follows that with a story of his father's birth in a small village in Africa. So he's linking this story. Suggesting his own birth there. He also talks about, if we read the sentence, to all peoples in government watching today, implying my journey from the grandest capitals to the small village where my father in Africa was born. But he suggests his journey from the small village in Africa where he was born to the capital. He suggests that journey. He is confessing that he unconsciously is an illegal president. He connects a second father story. He comes back to it towards the end of his speech, which is a crucial point. And he connects the story in this way: why a man can be president. And then he links it to his father, whose father could not be served in this town, of course, in the past, but whose father could not be served in this town. Read why Obama cannot serve in this town nor be seated in this town, because, and the town's D.C., is because he's illegal. If you back it up even further, he's talking about the price of citizenship. He then talks about how we can all celebrate the Constitution, the blacks and whites and races can unite and celebrate our creed, and then he tells this story about his father who can't serve. If we read the whole thing, he's saying, look, the price of citizenship is meeting constitutional requirements, which we can agree on and celebrate around the Constitution. All blacks and whites can do this, and now this is why a man cannot be seated as president, because implying I'm foreign born. So they, again, he had a key moment. He links things to the Constitution. Two key father stories. He's got to get in the Constitution, a birth in Africa. He does that. If we continue to look at the inauguration speech, we find numerous ideas which fit hand in glove with his confession of an illegal president. Now, understand again that we have a unique moment to look at his superintelligence reading him at the exact moment that he's just taken the oath, and he's telling us, I've just been sworn in as an illegal president. He would have a great need to confess at this time. Does he confess? See if these ideas fit. He talks about these ideas. Our journey has never been one, in America's journey, of shortcuts or settling for less. He goes on, those who prefer leisure over work, and those who seek only the pleasures of riches and fame, protecting narrow interest. And he talks about backroom deals that break America's trust. He goes on now, he shifts to power. Think of Alinsky. Our power alone does not entitle us what? To do what we please. And he speaks to those who cling to power through corruption and deceit, silencing dissent. You're on the wrong side of history, unclench your fist. He's talking to himself. Obama is confessing. Again, when we think of the Alinsky thrill of deceit here, and Obama identified with that consciously. Unconsciously, he's also confessing to it. He talks about standing up to the communist through not only with tanks, but with virtue, with the Constitution, with our ideals. He's behaved dictatorially as a president. He was behaving dictatorially at this moment. I will violate the law and become president. He keeps pointing towards his behavior. One of the things I do in forensic profiling is I look at keywords called message markers. Now, whisper is an example of one. Obama uses whisper in all his communications once. But whisper, and when I do a profile, I'll deliver a scientific examination of a document, and I'll notice these message markers and how they indicate key communications. Well, here we find a unique creative moment. Obama uses the word whisper in his inauguration speech, and he talks about fallen heroes who lie in Washington whisper through the ages. Listen again, fallen heroes who lie in Washington. You decode that, we've got a fallen hero, a president who is lying to us. He's confessing to that subtly. We go on and look at his entire speech, and it's about stand up for the Constitution. And he ends on that note in a powerful way. And his speech ends, in summary, he opens with a final story about America fighting the foreign enemy and the founding of our country, the British, but the foreign enemy. And he opens that segment with how far we have traveled in the year of our birth. Let us keep that in mind. I think he's talking about him, a birth reference. So keep in mind, he's foreign born is the answer. So he then talks about America must fight the common danger, the foreign born enemy, suggesting what he's done. When nothing but virtue, again, a constitutional reference, when nothing but virtue would survive, endure the storms that come, and carry that great gift of freedom symbolized by the Constitution, and deliver it, the Constitution, safely to future generations. He is subtly again appealing. Different images throughout the speech, different images of the Constitution, but he is shouting at us, stand up for the Constitution. We can see Barack Obama's superintelligence and how wise it is as it continues to advise us in his confession. What should he do? We ask the question about being an illegal president. We find numerous images of leave town, pack your bags, hitch your wagon. We hear images of retire with dignity. We hear images of this journey should end now. And another image, another key image, new life in the White House. He's telling himself what he should do. He should retire with dignity and confess. But he's not going to do that, obviously. So now we ask the question, is he telling us what America should do? And the first thing he says is, using the image of America being knocked to the ground, America should stand up and knock the dust off and take action now. But let me read it. But our time of standing pat, of protecting narrow interest and putting off unpleasant decisions, that's us dealing with, unfortunately, a president who doesn't meet constitutional qualifications. That time is surely past. Starting today, we must pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and begin again the work of remaking America. At another point in one of his speeches, he talks about Americans should march for justice as Martin Luther King did. See, that's the question here. His superintelligence presents the question to America. Has justice been served? Let's deal with it in truth. Has justice been served? And he's answering, no, it hasn't. He's been unfair to Americans. He's not abided by our rules that he's already confessed he needs to, and he wants to be stopped. And he says, we should do what Martin Luther King did, based on our natural law moral compass, based on our Constitution, which is undergirded by natural law. We should march on Washington in protest. This is his ideal now. The superintelligence always presents the best solution. The ideal solution, tough, but that's the one. So all of this fits together. If you look, all of his ideas fit together at this unique moment with a tremendous confession he's an illegal president. Now we come to the famous birth certificate presentation by President Obama on April 27th, 2011, a surprise presentation. And he is confessing through his actions that all other proof of his legality, it goes by the wayside. The birth announcements in the paper, the former certificate of live birth. So it's his way of saying a birth certificate should be presented, and now he's presented one. We have a fresh opportunity to hear his superintelligence, analyze him, quick read what he's done. Clearly this was done under duress. Donald Trump was pressuring him, a bestseller by Jerome Corsi, whereas the birth certificate was pressing him, and over 50% of the American people didn't believe he was a legal president. Public opinion was starting to mount, and so he felt under duress. This was produced under duress after fighting it for several years and spending a lot of money. So what does he say as he introduces his birth certificate and speaks to the media? He talks about the very first comment, so revealing because it's spontaneous. Before he gets started, he says, if this was a national security matter, I would not be interrupting television, but since it's not, I'm going to tell you about my birth certificate. Read, this is how important it is a national security matter. And then he goes on, and his images give us an idea of what the real truth is. He talks about distractions in America being distracted with sideshows and carnival barking. It's really what he was doing. He was presenting a sideshow of a phony birth certificate. He goes on and talks about America being distracted. People just make stuff up, and this is so crucial. Pretend that facts are facts and they're not facts. That's what he's doing. See, he's pretending this birth certificate is a fact when it's not a fact. How well this fits with Tim Adams' affidavit, a senior elections official in Hawaii in 2008, who testified there are no records in Hawaii of Obama's birth, as all his supervisors told him. 4 days later, Obama goes to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and Donald Trump is there, who's causing problems. And he belittles Trump, but at the same time, at the end of it, in jest, he said, "Good job, Donald." 2 weeks later, or a week later in Europe, he's in Europe, Obama is, and they ask him a question, do you know a good investor in America? And he says, oh, I know a good investor, Donald Trump. Again, a reference to Trump being shrewd and on top of things. He's confessing Trump was on the right track. Let's come back to the White House Correspondents' Dinner for one last comment. At the end of that dinner, he looks at the people and said, oh, by the way, parenthetically, let's think about the people that the South was just hit by a storm. Referencing again, he's the storm that hit America with his illegal presidency. And then he says to reporters, now listen, if you have to risk your lives, you report the truth. Speaking to the media who hasn't reported the truth. This is his take on the birth certificate. We've had another opportunity to look at his superintelligence, who tells us this birth certificate was a pretend fact that wasn't a fact. The media's response to Obama's birth certificate, total acceptance without examination. Sheriff Joe Arpaio's thorough evaluation with multiple document examiners revealed the birth certificate was a phony. The media refused to report the story, didn't explore it. As a forensic profiler, having worked in criminal cases, it's interesting. Obama has left evidence on the table. With the presentation of the birth certificate, we now have evidence that can be used one way or the other.